All right, welcome back in here to Live Now from Fox. I am Andy Mack. We heard some questions of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth inside that cabinet meeting earlier on today about that follow-up strike on a alleged drug-carrying boat in the Caribbean, saying he did not see that second strike back on September the 2nd. For more on this, let's go out to Rebecca Castor to get us up to speed.
Criticism for War Secretary Pete Hegseth is piling up after a report surfaced last week that the U.S. military conducted a follow-up strike on a suspected drug boat to kill survivors in the water.
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war.
Killing shipwreck survivors is a war crime.
He should never have been appointed. He's a disaster.
During a cabinet meeting Tuesday, Hegseth said he watched the first strike but wasn't in the room when the second shot was ordered. However, he stands by the Navy commander who made the call.
By the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat.
The Pentagon started targeting alleged drug smugglers in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific in early September. And since then, there have been at least 21 reported strikes and 83 deaths.
I can't recall any time in my history doing counterterrorism operations, we strike a group, whether that's a building or a boat or a vehicle, and then we were like, oh, well, there's survivors. Do we have to go? We can't kill them. Of course we kill them.
Several Democrats are calling for Hegseth to resign, but he's not pulling back on the military action and has President Trump's support.
The drugs coming in through the sea by sea are down 91%.
We've had a bit of a pause because it's hard to find boats to strike right now, which is the entire point, right?
Congress plans to investigate the double strikes, while the White House continues to insist this operation targeting drug cartels is lawful. In Washington, Rebecca Castor, Fox News.
All right, thank you so much for that, Rebecca, as Hegseth citing the fog of war in this, saying that Vice Admiral of the Navy Bradley had the complete authority to do so. Let's get into more about exactly what this means, as during that cabinet meeting, he said he did not see the survivors in the water when the second strike was ordered and launched, saying the vessel exploded in fire, smoke, and you can't see anything. So a little bit of a glimpse of what potentially Hegseth saw. Let's be joined right now by retired Marine Intelligence Officer, friend of the program, Hal Kempfer. Hal, thank you so much for joining us. I want to get into the term fog of war. Does that apply here?
Well, it's interesting how Pete Hegseth used fog of war. He was talking about when they hit it and there was a lot of smoke and stuff. And then right afterwards, he invokes fog of war. And it's like, yeah, usually when you say fog of war, we talk about the uncertainty that surrounds armed conflict. You know, what you're going up against, what's behind that hill, you know, the information coming in is incomplete or contradictory or something like that. Rarely have I had it actually referred to in context of something that looked like fog, which was the smoke coming from the boat after it was hit. But that's kind of what he was alluding to. But there is a certain degree of uncertainty. Now, could there have been a decision for a second strike on the boat in order to destroy the drugs? That's possible, but the reports that came in said that the order was that there were to be no survivors, and that's a very different order. And if that's the case, that appears to be a violation of under Article 51 of the Geneva Convention. It's a violation of U.S. law, under the Uniform Code of Military Justice. Any officer could be court-martialed for having issued an order like that. So it's also a violation of law, period. So anybody can be prosecuted. But there's a lot of ifs that go into that. We're still trying to figure out exactly what was that order. Now, it was kind of interesting today while defending Admiral Mitch Bradley, the commander of U.S. Special Operations Command, they kind of threw the blame for the decision to hit a strike onto Admiral Bradley as well. And I just, I have a feeling whatever was done there may have been a second strike, and it may have been with the intent of taking out, eliminating the drugs themselves and sinking the boat. And there may not have been knowledge that there were actual survivors in the water. That is very possible. Something like that. The optics are great, but they're not perfect. And if you have a lot of flame and stuff, you start running out of ways to pick them up. If you can't visually see them, if you can't use infrared because of the heat coming from the boat, you start running out of ways that you would identify anybody in the water. And then, of course, they'll also be burning pieces of the boat in the water and stuff. So you're never quite sure. So in that regard, blaming the fog of war probably wouldn't be an inaccurate way of basically, assessing the situation. But of course, if the order was no survivors, you're in a completely different legal standpoint there, and lawyers will probably stand on both sides and explain why it was done or defend why it was done. But most lawyers I know would look at that and say, if that was the order, they would definitely say it probably looks like it's a violation of Article 51.
In fog of war, we don't usually see it kind of used in a literal sense where there's fog or smoke out there. So I wanted to get your perspective on that. You also brought up a good point as I want to get into the chain of command in terms of this, because obviously the admiral there, the Vice Admiral Bradley, is a very high standing in the military. Pete Hegseth said he did witness the first strike. He had to go to other meetings, so he didn't see the second strike. How does it work in terms of that chain of command? Does Hegseth have to be there for this strike to be authorized? Is that something that is happening?
I actually found that the discussion of, like, I saw the first strike and I left and had to go to meetings, perfectly plausible. I mean, Secretary of Defense or Secretary of War has a lot of stuff going on. So, those are rather interesting when they, and that's something we can do now, something that we probably really couldn't do, say, 30 years ago or whatever, but something we can definitely do now, where you can sit there and get real-time input on tactical operations in the field like that, way out there, and in the field, this case means the water. But in the case of this, it's kind of an interesting thing. According to the report, SEAL Team 6, also sometimes referred to as DevGru, SEAL Team 6 was actually in charge of this operation. And of course, Admiral Bradley was a very, an amazing SEAL officer throughout his career. And SEAL Team 6, they're what they call a Tier 1 element. So they actually report up to a thing called Joint Special Operations Command. That was the previous command that Admiral Bradley had. And then now he's a 4-star admiral. He is a full admiral. He is in charge of Special Operations Command, the combatant command in charge of all special operations worldwide. So the chain of command goes from SOCOM through JSOC. And then from JSOC, it literally pretty much goes right to SEAL Team 6, because they are a unique asset. They're unlike any other asset that would be in the area. They could theoretically be chopped so that the U.S. Southern Command could have command of them. But it sounds to me like this was something where they coordinated with U.S. Southern Command, but Joint Special Operations Command was probably running this thing directly, autonomously, and it was the first one. So not shocked that they would set up a command relationship like that, if that's what it was. Again, the command relationship will be something that we have to figure out in time. Was there anybody between Special Operations Command, JSOC, and the SEAL team that was also making decisions? Did they put anybody in that path? Could something have been misinterpreted? And believe me, there is along with fog of war, we often use the term Murphy's Law, which is whatever can go wrong will go wrong. And if there was any ambiguity in an order, and somebody decided to interpret it the wrong way, that could also be a cause of why this happens. And that is one of the things in the military, we emphasize that over and over again, is to understand exactly what the order is. And the other thing we also push very hard is to understand the commander's intent. What does the commander want to do? At the end of the day, what is this thing supposed to look like, to make sure that mistakes don't happen, to make sure that the mission is actually accomplished? And, in one sense, the mission was accomplished. The boat was destroyed. The question is, was there an order that potentially, and however it was phrased, could have resulted in killing survivors? And again, it's not an absolute. I just want to be clear. That's been a big thing. They're under international law. It's like you're supposed to make every effort to save shipwrecked mariners. Okay. However, going back to World War I and going back to Hague before the Geneva Convention, one of the problems was, what about submarines? They're very small, and they shoot a torpedo out, and when they shoot the torpedo and they hit the ship, they go back underwater. they are not in a position to save anybody. Same thing with a special operations unit. They may not have the resources to actually engage in search and rescue to save anybody who's out there. That's not to say that they would. I disagree with that one comment about, when we're done with the mission, we don't have to kill them. That's actually incorrect what he said, and he's a Navy SEAL, but he's actually that the way he phrased that was incorrect, and I understood what he was trying to say, but that's not exactly how it works. And so in that situation, if they're trying to destroy the boat completely and destroy the load of narcotics, somehow that could have been convoluted into an interpretation that they weren't supposed to take survivors if there were survivors.
Yeah, that is a very good point. Obviously, that kind of circles back to the fog of war in terms of how they handle this. But as you mentioned, it is a pretty clear cut, or they ask for clarity when they're given these commands, especially from a person like an Admiral Bradley there. We'll see what happens in terms of this bipartisan investigation into it. We'll see if there's other videos. That might be something we allude to later on. Hal Kempfer, I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us here on Live Now.
All right. Thank you, Andy.
Thank you so much. All right, great conversation there about this. And this is not the end of this story. The Associated Press here talking about the fog of war. Let's take you back out to these quick comments from Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth alongside the president inside of this cabinet meeting, talking about this follow-up boat strike of an alleged drug-carrying vessel there in the Caribbean. Let's listen in.
I think you got to start with the baseline, which Marco laid out, everybody's laid out. We've got 20 million people invading our country over 4 years. We don't know where they're coming from. That includes Tren de Aragua and cartels and violent criminals. They bring drugs, and you mentioned it, Mr. President, poisoning, an intentional poisoning of the American people, killing hundreds of thousands of Americans. So the president had the courage to designate these cartels as designated terrorist organizations. Now, a number of us here served in the military and spent 20 years fighting terrorists like Al-Qaeda and ISIS on the other side of the world. How do you treat Al-Qaeda and ISIS? Do you arrest them and pat them on the head and say, don't do that again? Or do you end the problem directly by taking a lethal, kinetic approach? And that's the way President Trump has authorized the War Department to look at these cartels. And I wish everybody could be in the room watching our professionals like Mitch Bradley, Admiral Mitch Bradley, and others at JSOC and SOCOM and other commanders. The deliberative process, the detail, the rigorous, the intel, the legal, the evidence-based way that we're able to, with sources and methods that we can't reveal here, that make sure that every one of those drug boats is tied to a designated terrorist organization. We know who's on it, what they're doing, what they're carrying. All these white bales are not Christmas gifts from Santa. This is drugs running on four-motor fast boats or submarines that we've also struck. No one's fishing on a submarine. And I have empowered them to make that call. Now, the first couple of strikes, as any leader would want, you want to own that responsibility. So I said, I'm going to be the one to make the call after getting all the information and make sure it's the right strike. That was September 2nd. There's a lot of intelligence that goes into that, building that case and understanding that, a lot of people providing information. I watched that first strike live. As you can imagine, at the Department of War, we got a lot of things to do. So I didn't stick around for the hour and 2 hours, whatever, where all the sensitive site exploitation digitally occurs. So I moved on to my next meeting. A couple of hours later, I learned that commander had made which he had the complete authority to do. And by the way, Admiral Bradley made the correct decision to ultimately sink the boat and eliminate the threat. He sunk the boat, and eliminated the threat. And it was the right call. We have his back. And the American people are safer because narco-terrorists know you can't bring drugs through the water and eventually on land if necessary to the American people. We will eliminate that threat, and we're proud to do it.
So you didn't see any survivors, to be clear, after that first strike?
I did not personally see survivors, but I stand, because the thing was on fire. It was exploded and fire and smoke. You can't see anything. You got digital. This is called the fog of war. This is what you in the press don't understand. You sit in your air-conditioned offices or up on Capitol Hill and you nitpick and you plant fake stories in the Washington Post about kill everybody, phrases on anonymous sources not based in anything, not based in any truth at all. And then you want to throw out really irresponsible terms about American heroes, about the judgment that they made. I wrote a whole book on this topic because of what politicians and the press does to warfighters. President Trump has empowered commanders to do what is necessary, which is dark and difficult things in the dead of night on behalf of the American people. We support them, and we will stop the poisoning of the American people.
And Mr. Secretary, on the second strike, you said it happened more than an hour after the first. Did I hear it correctly?
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of time.